I would like to ask a first question. Do we actually have anybody from the press here today? Can I ask you to put your hands up? No? No interest in the press? Or we have one colleague from the press? Well, in that case, I'll try and make it a little bit more interesting than the normal commission talk. Because the first time that 3D printing breaks the surface of press consciousness and public consciousness is when some free-thinking people in the United States start manufacturing guns with 3D printing technology. And this automatically ensures public interest, not the public interest, but public interest. Actually, the results of the most covered stories, which were of a couple of plastic pistols which were produced, one of which actually failed during its firing tests, and the other did in fact work for a bit, were not really very impressive. What I think was much more impressive was that using the metal sinter 3D printing technology and a much more impressive industrial 3D printing machine, some other outfit in the States produced a facsimile of the 1910 Browning automatic pistol. And this actually fired on the range, fired the same ammunition as a normal Browning pistol from that era. And I guess as somebody who has shot firearms myself, including one of the descendants of that very same Browning pistol, my main concern would not be for the public, but actually for the person shooting that pistol. And I would have questions about whether a pistol like that was actually safe for the person who was shooting it over the lifetime of the equivalent Browning product. And I'd be prepared to bet that that particular facsimile is now in a museum or it's acting as a paperweight in somebody's office, because we don't know. Nobody knows. And that brings me to what I think will be the leitmotif of any debate on 3D printing, which is what are the opportunities and what are the actual risks of 3D printing. So after that introduction, let me just say a little bit about where I come from. I work for the Foresight team within the DG Connect, Content Networks and Technologies. We have a big slice of the research budget as well as some regulatory responsibilities as well, particularly in the communications area. Over the past couple of years, we've run a Foresight project, which I think was quite innovative in terms of involving people who are non-experts, of crowdsourcing futures from the real world, not just from the type of consultants that the Commission tends to engage for doing this type of work. And we did use some consultants to help make sense of those futures and to kind of rationalize them into 11 jumbo futures. And one of them was on new economic models. And don't forget, these are aspirational futures. Futures are not things that will happen, but they're things that might happen. And the main benefit of futures is, Foresight, is that it gets you thinking out of this kind of very linear approach to the future, which particularly civil servants tend to suffer from, which is what is the future of my file, over the next 5 years with a new commissioner. So it expands your vision, and it above all gets you to think of, well, what would be the impact of, on my file if somebody else's file actually collided with it, which is much more in the real world. So that is the type of process that we went through to create the sort of jumbo futures. And one of them is called New Economic Models, and 3D printing does figure in that jumbo future. There is an aspiration from people this idea of new economic models contains the aspirational idea that industry should be much less wasteful, that there should be much more local involvement of manufacturing, and also people want a more individual customization. So 3D printing really kind of brings all those aspirations together into one place. So actually before the kind of the more general public hype about 3D printing, I think we had actually started to have some of the key discussions about 3D printing. But our future is an optimistic one. And one of my colleagues has disloyally written on the website underneath that actually it's all too optimistic and we haven't actually looked at the risks and the downsides. So this brings me to the other piece of the other document I have here today, which is a kind of a first sense making from a number of colleagues across the Commission on what are the challenges and opportunities of 3D printing. I would want to point out that we have not received any instructions to launch a vast initiative on 3D printing. This is not the time for initiatives, as you know, because the Commission is changing. We've just had elections. But nonetheless, at service level, we are trying to prepare for a non-siloed discussion of 3D printing in case we are asked by one or more commissioners to embark on such a discussion under the next mandate, which is quite possible given that real life might cause such a discussion to take place, particularly if something goes wrong. Low frequency, high impact events are the big nightmare in risk management, and it is often that type of event which causes a public policy debate. So that said, what have we come up with so far? Well, certainly in terms of the sort of discussions we're having, mass customization really comes out as being one of the key important features of 3D printing. And we're talking about a very wide range of applications, not just in the area of inanimate objects, but also body parts, medicines, and it is very broad. Already in the first paragraph, I see threats of security being signalled, probably because of the gun stories that I mentioned first. So, well, what are the origins of 3D printing? Well, it's already 30 years old, apparently. It's been bubbling under for a long time, starting in the United States and descended, of course, from office printing technology. So what can we expect going forward? Well, continuous rolling improvement through more sophisticated additive processes. We have various research projects, as I said, in DG Connect that we manage, so I guess we will be hearing from our projects about some of those improvements as they happen. We think that 3D printers will not be standing in isolation in people's offices or in people's homes, although actually you can already order a simple 3D printer off the local Dutch equivalent of Amazon here for a couple of €100, but they will be network enabled, and they will interact with some of the other trends that we're seeing, such as cloud computing, and there will be a kind of ball of innovations that rolls forward together. And 3D printing will not be separate from these. It is a strand in that ball. So we see, obviously, the scope for reducing the labour costs of manufacturing and modifying the existing international division of labour. One of the ideas from the future was that that manufacturing would come back from the Far East because of 3D printing. This is aspirational, as I say, but in terms of what I read, it is not entirely unlikely. If more material is printed and produced locally, I mean, can you imagine all those sort of Photoshops which have now gone out of business that were printing off your films? Can you imagine if they all popped up again as 3D printing enterprises for anything that you couldn't, that you couldn't do at home? And what is the impact of that going to be on the logistics industry, the trucking industry, basically? So that's identified as an interest. We think that clearly there are going to be some IPR issues here. How is it going to work if local workshops, if people in their homes are able to copy what are patented designs incredibly easily? So is there going to be a kind of a big pirate IPR market like we've seen in the media, or on the contrary, are people going to be making their plans available for a fee and actually assisting you to print parts rather than paying big markups to distribute, shall we say, a part of your vacuum cleaner through the shops, which is the current model? Are we going to be able to dematerialize that type of business? So I see the words adapt the IP policy framework, and because of my experience in media, I am already afraid. From an environmental perspective, there are both hopes and fears. Hopes that there will be less waste, but also fears that if consumers end up by doing this, if this means that more raw material is going to be delivered to consumers, that will somehow reduce the environmental dividend that could be realized. How does safety legislation, product safety legislation, apply when consumers are printing stuff off themselves? Let's imagine that touch point for political debate, toys. And you have small parts, you have debates, many debates over many years about the toys and the safety of toys that children are allowed to play with. So we will also be looking at liability. I say we will be looking. One would need to look at liability regulation and health and safety rules going forward as this 3D printing trend matures. And above all, we will see, as we do see in many digital markets, that those with incumbent positions in markets will, of course, seek to protect their position by trying to retain legacy regulation in place. So the D word, I see it before me, I've even underlined it. The disruptive potential of this technology is such that policy challenges should not be underestimated. I think that's a reasonable assumption. But we are so far, very far from genetically engineered organisms and the kind of Frankenfood reaction that people had to that. So I don't want to exaggerate the risks. In the risk literature, we talk about risk amplification. So just everybody calm down, take a deep breath. Thank you very much for your patience.